This is A New Angle, a show about cool people doing awesome things in and around Montana. I'm your host, Justin Angle. This show is supported by First Security Bank, Blackfoot Communications, and the University of Montana College of Business. Hey folks, welcome back, and thanks for tuning in. Today's guest is Michael Dubin, founder and former CEO of Dollar Shave Club, a business that revolutionized direct-to-consumer marketing and created ripple effects throughout the global economy.
Everybody I've met in all the corners of the state that I've spent time in are really excited to do big things and put Montana on the map.
Michael is spending a lot of his time in Montana these days, and I'm excited to learn more about what he's up to. Michael, thanks for coming on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
So tell us, where did you grow up and what did your parents do?
Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. My mother was a teacher, and then she was in real estate, and my dad was an attorney.
Okay. So you were spending some time in Montana. You spent time in Montana over the years. Talk about your connection to the state of Montana.
So the first time I came to Montana was in 2001, and I was on a road trip with some buddies right after I graduated college, and we ended up in Bozeman, and I was like, this is it. This is where it's at. And obviously that was over 20 years ago, and Bozeman has changed quite a bit, so much so that it's kind of hard for me to even remember and recognize where I was in town when I was there. But it's still got all the magic. The magic has evolved. And I know that comes with some complications, especially for folks that have been there for a long time, but it is it's a beautiful state. I've come back there over the years in all four seasons. I've been up north, near Glacier and Whitefish and Flathead Lake, down in Missoula and down in the Bitterroot, and Montana has it all.
So let's talk about Dollar Shave Club. I mean, I've been kind of interested in your company or your former company for a long time. I mean, it just came along at such a ripe time and in many ways revolutionized direct-to-consumer marketing. I think many people's entry point with the brand and the company is that amazing advertisement that you launched with. Tell us about the genesis story. Like, how did the idea of getting into this industry and the motivation to do it come to fruition?
Like a lot of businesses, it starts with a key insight. And the insight here was buying razors is a huge pain in the ass.
Mm-hmm.
The razors at retail are always locked. You always have to find the person with the key. And then, you have to wait for them and then you have to wait in line. And it's just a really frustrating consumer experience. And so I had that observation when I was living in New York City right after college. But I didn't do anything with it at the time. And then I met my friend's wife's father at a holiday party in 2010. And he happened to be an importer of all sorts of things. He had a big warehouse filled with goods from Asia. And some of those goods included cake slicers and razors. And, he said he knew that I had web experience and marketing experience. So he said, do you have, any interest in taking these products off my hands? And I said, well, no to the cake slicers, but sure for the razors, because I'd had that insight, earlier that buying razors was a pain in the ass, and there was probably a better way to do it. And I had the idea for Dollar Shave Club pretty much right away. So that's how, it's like anything, it's like a strong insight and then some serendipity.
Talk about that ability to kind of communicate that key insight so clearly and so viscerally to so many people. Obviously a key insight to you, it resonates with folks, but how do you then sort of make that come to life?
I decided that it would be good for us to make a video that told the story. If you can make a good video or make a good commercial, it's better than text on screen. So I had some background in improv and sketch comedy. And so I used those talents to write this video over the course of a month in late 2011, and then I enlisted the help of a friend who I had done some sketch work with when I was living in New York, and asked her if she would direct it. Her name was Lucia, and she ultimately went on to create Broad City and Hacks on HBO, and she's just an incredible talent and has been, it's funny, our careers, so to speak, changed trajectory right at the same time because of
Yeah.
that video that we did together. And so, we used humor, and humor is a powerful device. Hi, I'm Mike, founder of DollarShaveClub.com. What is DollarShaveClub.com? Well, for $1 a month, we send high-quality razors right to your door. Yeah, $1. Are the blades any good? No, our blades are f***ing great. Whenever you're telling a story, if you can evoke a visceral reaction from the consumer, make them laugh, make them cry, say something poignant, you're going to stick in their minds, more so than if it's just a straight up sales pitch or a sloppy sales pitch. Writing great ads is really hard. You have to be brief, you have to be direct, and you have to make sure you're not including too much. You see a lot of ads where companies are just trying to cram way too much information into
Sure.
too short a time, and it doesn't work. So being mindful of all those things. We shot that video in October of 2011, and then used it to raise some money for Dollar Shave Club over the next 6 months, and then launched that video in 2012.
It's important for listeners to think back to 2011. I mean, this was a time where the internet was a lot different than it is now. Social media was certainly a lot different than it is now. Brands weren't really communicating to their customers through, I mean, certainly we're communicating with video through advertising and so forth, but not really through YouTube, and you weren't seeing a lot of consumer packaged goods communicating directly to customers in the way that you all did.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, in 2011, it was relatively the dark ages. I mean, I can't think of too many direct-to-consumer businesses that were talking straight to their customers and selling online. The only ones I can think of really are Warby Parker and Bonobos. I think those companies kind of started the wave. And then I think we put some real wind behind the sails on the wave. That's to mix my metaphors. But we really accelerated the pace of development in the D2C space because I think people saw what was possible when you have a good product, you tell a great story, and you're providing value to the consumer. So yeah, we were really fortunate to take advantage of a quiet ecosystem to grow really fast. And I think it's a lot harder nowadays than it was back in 2012 when we launched. Now everybody with an Instagram page is trying to sell you something.
They're not only trying to sell you something, they're trying to sell you a subscription. So that seems like a key part of the plot too, is like you guys were one of the first movers with this direct-to-consumer subscription model. Really changed the game of marketing, of how businesses are run, how they're evaluated by the capital markets. Talk about the moment where y'all thought that subscriptions was the way to do this.
Yeah, well, first, I have to say that, before you give us too much credit for creating something, I think it's important to point out, subscriptions, direct-to-consumer subscriptions were available before Dollar Shave Club. You could subscribe to magazines, you could subscribe to your cable company, subscriptions, direct-to-consumer was around, and you could buy affordable razors on the internet before Dollar Shave Club. You could even buy our exact razor affordably on the internet before Dollar Shave Club. But it was the way you weave all of these things together and package it up to create value, emotional connection, and a couple other things to really say to the consumer, hey, you should give us a try. And I don't mean to trivialize what we did and how it changed the game, but I think it's important to recognize what we can take credit for and what we can't. So I think subscriptions worked for us because of the category, the shaving category. And anybody that shaved knows that when you change your blade, you get a better shave. It's more comfortable, it's a little bit closer, and it feels great. Ultimately, what the Dollar Shave Club subscription feature, if you want to call it that, did was it sort of started to condition folks to change their blade more regularly versus milking it longer than they ought to because they didn't want to go to the store and deal with that frustrating buying experience. So the subscription worked for us because of the category and because having the subscription made the consumer's experience with the product better. But there are a lot of companies that just try to launch a subscription because they love the way that recurring revenue looks on their financial statements, and they like the idea of recurring revenue, and that's not the right North Star. The subscription has to work for the consumer Otherwise, you're going to build resentment.
So let's talk about your time as CEO. I mean, you kind of had a variety of experiences leading Dollar Shave Club, but certainly not the sort of experience to position you to be the leader of such a large organization. Talk about, your development from the leadership standpoint.
Yeah, that's a long journey. It's a journey that, never really stops. When I got in the game, I was I'd had a career for 10 or so years in media and marketing and brand development and a little bit of e-com, and I had managed a few people, but I'd never run a company the size of what Dollar Shave Club ultimately became. Over the course of the 10-year journey, there were different, I would say, inflection points where you sort of have to shed your skin and develop a new set of muscles so that you can continue the journey and your company can continue to thrive. Not always easy to do that. And you learn from hiring experienced people around you. You learn from, hopefully, you have access to some coaching and you can reach out and help and get the help that you need, because, rarely does it just sort of occur to you how to grow as a leader, and so you go from managing a company of, one person, yourself, to 5 people, to 25 people, to 100 people, to ultimately 350 people. And that's just a much different exercise.
What was the process of learning those lessons? I mean, were you always sort of the person that knew that you had to put the best people around you as possible and learn from them, or did that take some growing pains to be able to say, no, I need to hire people who are better writers and better leaders and better operationalists than I am to make this thing go to where we want it to get to?
It's easier in some areas to reach out for senior leadership because you literally just don't have the experience. So supply chain is an easy one, or, warehousing and shipping. You can figure that stuff out to ship a couple packages when your business is small in the early days. But scaling an operation like that just requires a completely different set of muscles, right? And so, like, you don't even try to do that. And so it's easy to say, yeah, I need a senior head of supply chain or finance. I can bump my way around a spreadsheet, okay, but certainly not to the level to create, complex forecasts and scenario planning and pivot tables and all the other kind of stuff that ultimately you're going to need to do to run a complex organization. In areas where you have some expertise, maybe it gets a little, harder to reach out, or not harder, but you maybe are a little slower to reach out. So, for example, if you have decent marketing instincts, you might be hesitant to go out and hire senior marketing talent because you think, hey, I'm pretty good and, we're doing okay. And you do have to be scrappy for a little while, but eventually, again, there's the old saying, if you want to go fast, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. So, ultimately, if you want to drive scale in your business, you're going to have to figure out a way to engage other people and grow your team. That's just a non-negotiable. Some areas are easy to see it than in others.
And a big part of the scale question, I assume, was the decision to sell to Unilever on several years back. And your story's somewhat unique in that, you build this company, you sell it to a major conglomerate, and then you stick around for 5 or so more years as the CEO. Talk about that decision. Why Unilever? Why that time? How did that play out?
Yeah, I mean, I think a couple reasons. Number one, jumping into the arms of an acquirer who's excited about the business you've built, for us, was the right thing to do, because number one, it eliminated our need to ever go out and raise money again, because now we had very deep pockets, at our disposal, so to speak. Not at our disposal, like, hey, give us some money, and they gave us money whenever we wanted. We obviously had to submit a plan, a sensible plan. Number two, Unilever is a huge company. They make the makers of Dove soap and Axe body spray and Vaseline and a ton of other huge brands. And when Dollar Shave Club was acquired, we were direct consumer only. And at some point, Unilever would want to take us to retail. That experience, rather than going out and trying to hire that experience was already, quote, in the building when
Sure.
it comes to retail, at Unilever. And then a third was access to the resources of the big company, non-financial resources in the form of IP, intellectual property. So formulations, for different products, sophisticated procedures for developing those products. All of that stuff made a lot of sense for us to take advantage of. So for us, it was really a no-brainer that it was a great strategic fit for us to sell to Unilever.
And so you stick around for a few years, but leave the business, what, 2020? Is that accurate?
I left, so we were acquired in 2016, and I stayed on until January of 2021.
We'll be back to my conversation with Michael Dubin after this short break. A New Angle is supported by First Security Bank, Blackfoot Communications, and UM's College of Business. Access to capital, broadband, and education are 3 ingredients any community needs for success. Hey folks, Accelerate Montana and the Women's Entrepreneurship and Leadership Lab have created 8 online micro courses designed to provide current and aspiring women business owners real-world solutions to your business problems. These courses are practical and hands-on and will give you skills and capabilities you can put to work on your business right away. Courses include topics such as managing finances, how to create value for your customers, and pivoting your business. For more information on each course and how to register, visit wellwbc.org/microcourses. That's wellwbc.org/microcourses.
Hey, this is Colter Nuanez from ESPN Missoula, and you're listening to A New Angle.
Welcome back to A New Angle. We're talking about Dollar Shave Club and entrepreneurship with Michael Dubin. So relatively recently left. What is that like to be, early 40s and kind of turning the page to something new?
What's it like? Well, in some ways it's terrifying because you spend your whole life kind of grinding and wanting to make yourself into a success. And, which is what I did in my 20s. And then my 30s was all about, building Dollar Shave Club. Now it's, I've got, a lot of good years left, hopefully. And I want to have an impact and that's tremendously exciting, but also frustrating because, the answer of what to do isn't immediately obvious.
Sure.
But I'm fortunate that I'm in this position, of course. And not everybody gets to have the luxury of time and choice when it comes to determining their career path. But yes, there are moments where I'm like, gee, what's the right path? And when there are so many options, sometimes that can be overwhelming. I'm in the midst of figuring all that stuff out right now.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, you mentioned right at the head of that answer is making an impact. And I would assume you go through a career arc that you've gone through. You must get a ton of inbound asking you to invest in this or donate your name to this or time or energy or whatever it is. What are your priorities for making an impact, and how do you make choices where you want to allocate your time, effort, and resources?
Well, I probably spend 5% of my time doing board stuff and advisory work, and I'm selective there because I want to make sure that there's a give and a get, so to speak. I want to make sure that I'm giving valuable insight and time to these companies, but I also want to learn something. I don't really do much investing at all anymore, just because I don't have the time to diligence companies. If I'm really excited about something or an entrepreneur, I'll do it. But I'm not keen on just doing it to do it. I find myself wanting to get into the weeds more, and you're just not able to at scale when you're investing in your one person. If you have a team, that's something different. So it's a little bit, so not much investing. I started a wildfire nonprofit, which has been really interesting. As you know, in Montana, well, wildfires are a big part of our lives now and everywhere in the West. And so, I'm spending a little bit of time trying to get some regulations changed at the FAA so that drones can play a bigger role in the fight against wildfire.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm also leading some expeditions, actually in Montana to raise awareness for the importance of fuel mitigation and forest management. So that's been super cool and connected me to some really interesting places. Doing a little creative writing. I've had a screenplay in my head for the last 20 years that I'm trying to get out. That's been a maddening but interesting journey. And then, I spend a lot of time thinking about democracy in America and where we are as a country right now. And we live in some very interesting and challenging times. And, I'm working to understand what my role can be in making sure that future generations have a free and fair country to live in. So, and then I've got a couple other business ideas, but nothing that's pulling me off the sidelines.
You spend time in Montana. You spend time interacting with the entrepreneurial community here in Montana. In your view, is there anything unique about the entrepreneurial community here in Montana and some of the attributes of the folks and what they're up to here?
I mean, absolutely. The first thing that comes to mind is the energy and the enthusiasm to do big things and put Montana on the map. Everybody I've met, in all the corners of the state that I've spent time in, are really excited to do big things and put Montana on the map. And it already is in some really interesting ways. So the energy for that is palpable. Solving unique Montana problems also is something that people have an energy for, as Montana changes and evolves. One of the big challenges I see people excited about is, how do you make sure that everybody comes along for the ride and that it's not just a story for the few? And that's a great thing to have your eye on, whether you were born in state or you're new to Montana and spending time there. That's in many ways a microcosm of what's happening in America more broadly. So the fact that there are smart people thinking about that right now is energizing, and everybody's just really eager to connect and engage. And that's, a wonderful sort of open mind, open arms attitude that I think will go a long way.
And it occurs to me that, if you take the 10 plus years that you dedicated your life to Dollar Shave Club, I mean, it sort of encapsulates so many arcs of business history. I mean, we talked about the way direct consumer marketing and branding would take place back in 2010 to how it takes place now, how the economy has changed, how, how brands communicate with consumers has changed, the rise, and, who knows where social media is and where it's going. If you were advising students now, based on what you've sort of lived through these last 10 years, I mean, what are the forces and things you see on the rise versus the things you think that we're learning, okay, maybe those weren't great ideas?
One of the questions I get a lot is, how would you launch Dollar Shave Club today in today's climate? And the game is different because the tools are different, because the ecosystem has evolved. When I launched Dollar Shave Club, it was quiet from a D2C perspective. Now there's a ton of noise. Again, everybody with an Instagram or a TikTok is trying to sell you something, and it's very crowded. And you're competing for eyeballs and attention with people who are not just in your category, but in other categories. So it's a very noisy environment, number one. But on the other hand, it's very easy to launch a website. Now you can have an e-commerce site looking good and running efficiently in an afternoon. And that's very different. But D2C only, I don't think is, a winning formula the way it was in 2011 or 12. I think it can be where you start, but I think pretty quickly you need to find ways to break through the noise in the real world and grab consumers' attention, get their eyes and hands on the product or service as quickly as you can. It's just very hard to do it in that noisy online only environment. So it's and then get to omnichannel as fast as you can. Go omnichannel from day one would be my advice.
Sure. Let's take a moment to Michael. I don't know if all listeners will know the term omnichannel. What does that mean?
Omnichannel means, the crudest definition is probably selling online and in retail, but both places. Now, retail could be your own retail, brick and mortar. It could be a pop-up. It could be a mobile store. It could be through a retail partnership with a Target or a Ralph's or a Costco or an Albertsons or a Kroger. It could be anything where just a consumer can, in a three-dimensional environment that's not the metaverse, can touch product or a service and get an experience and purchase the product as well as online.
And why is it important to be in all those places? I mean, for a while it was, direct to consumer was considered, oh yeah, we can just eliminate all the intermediaries and eliminate all those people that just suck out our margin. Why is it important to now have more of a portfolio of customer channels?
I think it was always important. I think the conventional wisdom has evolved because operators are much smarter and switched on about the different types of consumers that are
Sure.
out there and their preferences. Some consumers will always prefer to shop in retail. Some will always prefer to shop online. Some prefer to do both, depending on the occasion or the circumstances. In one category or the category. In one category, they may prefer convenience of online. In another category, convenience actually means going to the store and buying. So there are a multitude of different motivating beliefs for the consumer. And I think operators are much more switched on to that. So I think in the early days, just because there were so many D2C companies that blew up quickly, folks were like, oh, that's the future and retail's dead. Those folks that were in business in 2011 and 12 and 13, 14, remember the headlines, retail's dead. And that was much, much overstated. I think people know better now.
And so in our remaining time, and you mentioned a moment ago, some of the activities and areas where you're allocating your efforts right now. You mentioned the state of democracy, you mentioned wildfire. I mean, some of these big problems, whether it's climate change, whether it's political polarization, whatever. Do you think that business needs to play a role in solving some of these problems? And what sort of role do you think is where you'd like to allocate some business resources?
Well, to the latter point, I think that's something that I'm still figuring out. To the former question, I think every business has to figure that out for themselves. I think for a lot of businesses, especially large ones, it has gotten very hard to ignore some social issues. And I think for others, it hasn't been as hard to avoid them. So I think every business has to make that decision for themselves, and they'll make those decisions based on who their customers are and who their employees are, who their investors are. There's no one answer. In some cases, it will make a lot of sense for companies to engage themselves in a social issue or an environmental issue or a cultural issue. And in other cases, it won't.
Michael, it's been fascinating learning more about your journey and appreciate you freeing up the time for us. And also, it's great to kind of have you in the Montana orbit. So hopefully our paths will cross in person sometime soon.
Yes, absolutely. I'm excited. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be a part of the Montana community and do my part to be a good neighbor. Thanks for the welcome.
If people want to learn more about any of the projects you're working on, like Wildfire Project, for example, where would you point people online?
I think you can go to safewoods.com, which is the name of my nonprofit. It's still early, but you can poke around the beta site of safewoods.com. I'm on LinkedIn, so anybody that wants to reach out can hit me there. There's obviously a lot of inbound, or maybe not obviously, but there's a lot of inbound. And so sometimes it'll take me a minute to get to it. But yeah, I would say that's a good start.
Awesome. Thanks very much, Michael.
Thanks for your time.
Thanks for listening to A New Angle. We really appreciate it. And we're coming to you from Studio 49, a generous gift from UM alums Michelle and Lauren Hansen. A New Angle is presented by First Security Bank, Blackfoot Communications, and the University of Montana College of Business. With additional support from Consolidated Electrical Distributors, Drum Coffee, and Montana Public Radio. Keely Larson is our producer. VTO, Jeff Ament, and John Wicks made our music. Editing by Nick Mott. Social media by AJ Williams, and Jeff Neese is our master of all things sound. Thanks a lot, and see you next time.